In exactly 12 months from now, Uganda will go to the ballot to elect its leaders, including the president, members of parliament, and representatives at local level. Uganda's Electoral Commission has declared a roadmap that will shape how the electoral process will look like. They are also requesting for more money to ensure that they deliver a free and fair election. What will it take us to have a peaceful election? And is Uganda ready for the 2026 election? We answer that question on this episode of The Hard Questions with Charity Ahimbisibwe, a lawyer, a close observer of electoral processes in Africa, and the executive director of Electoral Laws and Governance Institute. Charity Ahimbisibwe, welcome to The Hard Questions.
Thank you, Solomon. Always happy to be here with you and happy to be with your viewers.
You don't have the vibe of elections around you. I mean, someone asked me that, does it feel like it's elections already? I mean, everyone is quiet. Things are not taking shape. What is happening? We're not yet feeling the elections fever. But I hope it picks up as we go on, with the update of the National Register and candidates going out later on in the year. Charity, is Uganda ready for the 2026 elections? You, as a close observer of elections in Africa and particularly here in Uganda.
So is Uganda ready? Uganda is not ready for the 2026 elections. And why do I posit that Uganda is not ready? You see, we've done so many elections, this being the 7th election. So at the 7th try, there should be excitement like what we've seen in 2021, what we've seen in 2016, what we've seen in 2001. Remember, in 2001, as soon as Kizza Besigye announced that I'm going to stand as a presidential candidate against President Museveni, boom, the media was all over. A new presidential candidate has shown up. Then we came to 2006, and it was same story. It was Kizza Besigye, but a second try from 2001. And remember, in 2001, there was a rumor that it's possible he won this election. So there was all that rumor for 5 years that it's probable, there's a chance, there's a good chance that Kizza Besigye could beat President Museveni to the election. Every time you have competition in an election, then it is a good election. That is why for America, the moment Trump was standing against Kamala Harris, the election took a different tide. When it was Joe Biden, it was business as usual. People were like, 2 old men, who do we choose from? What's exciting about these 2 old men? It's an old story. What can we do with these people? As soon as the lady hit the road, the story changed. Trump's trail changed. The story for Trump changed. Attacks from Harris increased enormously. The campaign took off. So until that one silver bullet moment for our 2026 election, when we see a candidate who will ignite a spark in the young people that will resonate with the new voter, because now we think about the new voter. There's an old voter who is tired, says, I have been voting for the last 7 years and I don't seem to see my candidate win. But there is a new voter who says, I don't care what you voted for. I am coming on board and mine might win. What do you know about them? Until we see that candidate metamorphosize and come out and say, I'm standing against President Museveni, and there is hope built around this new entity or whoever it is that will choose to stand, the election is going to continue to be quiet, a laissez-faire attitude, and although it shouldn't ideally be in a good democratic dispensation.
Yeah.
I will say that in a good democratic dispensation, by now, so many things should have happened. There should have been several systematic studies that should be running on big research pages like Ipsos, Research World International, civil society organizations should be putting out systematic research on what they have found out the ground is like, Are people excited about another electoral cycle? That should all be churned out. But it's not happening. One, because of the donor world and what has happened with civil society and donor world. There's less money. Sustainability for civil society organizations has also not been so good. They are trying to reinvent the wheel, rethink around what can they do for these particular elections, and the funding is not readily there. For previous cycles, 2001, we had funding even to observe the voter update process. There was funding from the DGF. Now, when that money came in, then the vote issues, not vote Wolokoso, was there. So these campaigns were running flawlessly. But right now, there is no campaign that is significantly happening, apart from a few social media campaigns that have happened with young people like AIIJ, the African Youth
Development Link.
Yes, they've had a few campaigns for young people, for people in the slums, but they've not picked. You see, Solomon, the media is not only new media. For new media to pick, there must be a spark that is coming from probably TikTok. Somebody should go to TikTok and say, this and this is happening, and then it ignites a fire, or there is this research that has happened. Something interesting has happened, which I thought would have been picked up with those who say they are doing campaigns around the processes, including AIIJ. 2 national registers were being updated. The NRM register was being updated.
And we will speak to the register just briefly, because I wanted to get your insights on that. But let me just pick it up from where you left it, the excitement in the air. And there's a lot of doubt that has been cast on Uganda's electoral processes, especially for presidential elections. Mm-hmm. Prominent politicians like Dr. Kizza Besigye have come out to say, you can never remove President Museveni through an election. Other opposition leaders like, Robert Chagulanyi, who also tried in the last election, came out and said the electoral processes, were not free. The elections were not free and fair. There's a general lack of trust in Uganda's electoral system, especially for presidential level. The Electoral Commission on the other side says they deliver a credible election. But behind that doubt is what many people have been advocating for: electoral reforms. What would make the population believe in the electoral processes is because when they feel that the Electoral Commission is free and fair and the electoral processes have been independent of the executive, of the judiciary, and of the legislature. Electoral reforms, let's start there. As we build up to 2026, there's been a loud call for electoral reforms, electoral reforms, electoral reforms. Do you see, Charity, electoral reforms being tabled by the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs before the House, especially that the Supreme Court made the recommendations that these electoral reforms should come at least 2 years before the elections? Do you have hope that we'll have electoral reforms before we get to the elections?
But Solomon, that is to trust too much. You clearly see that there is not going to be any electoral reform before 2026. Like you have rightly said, the judges said 2 years before the next electoral process. We're already in the electoral process. 2 years before the next electoral process. Before the roadmap would come out, those reforms needed to have already taken off. They needed to have been tabled, and they needed to have been discussed, and the reforms should have been instituted. That is what should have happened. It didn't happen. Then the roadmap was released. The roadmap started to roll. We are now at voter update process. You can't be updating a voter register for the next election and reforms come out. Reforms such as reduction in the number of MPs in the House. That was a reform that was mooted by Mpuga, and it was also mooted by the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, who since went into a limbo. After he came out, he poked 2-3 times, and then he later came out to say, look, I am not the executive. I am not the president of this country. I am not even the judiciary. I am not even the parliament. I'm simply a minister of constitutional affairs. These were Mao's words. At that point, the Honorable Norbert Mao had given up. So he took a back seat and he's been sleeping for the last 6-7 months. He can't come out talk about these reforms because he said, look, I have also been frustrated. You can only push so much. He could not achieve them. Now, if the Minister of Constitutional Affairs has failed to achieve the reforms, where can we begin to trust that these reforms will be instituted ahead of 2026? I don't see any reform coming ahead of 2026 elections. We are going with what is existent in the law as is, despite the recommendations of 2016, despite the recommendations of 2021. Those are two critical electoral cycles. And Solomon, let me just add my voice. That is unfortunate. That is a poor electoral cycle. That is a poor electoral system. A proper electoral system is one that learns from a previous electoral system. It is one that carries forth reforms. It is one that espouses a better process than the process for the previous election. But what has happened with us? From 1996, we've carried backlog into the next election, backlog and backlog and backlog. And we never seem to unblock. So you think of a pipe, and there's a lot of sewage or dirt going into that pipe, and you never unblock that pipe. What happens? It gets clogged. Water can't flow in that pipe anymore. That's where you are. So there is no reform that has happened. Everything backlog, clogged, and so your system is clogged. And the Ugandan, the voter, the one that has voted for the last 6 cycles and is going to the 7th, is asking themselves that one fundamental question. I participated in 1996. I participated in 2001. I participated in 2006. So did I in 2021. So what is it are you telling me? In 2016, I participated. 2021, I participated. What new thing do you have that you are offering me that I don't know about? I will make an academic discussion around why voters should not give up and still go ahead and vote. The academic discussion around that is, if no votes, then what? Do we become Congo? Do we become Beirut? Do we become Libya? Do we choose war over peace and the choice to simply vote because we must vote? Because with every electoral cycle, and this is an academic discussion, I said I'm going to make an academic argument, Solomon. I left the realistic. I'm now on the academic angle. And the reason I do make the academic argument is only for one reason. I choose to go academic because I realize that globally there is a challenge around elections and electoral processes. Elections, democracy are being challenged even in key democratic countries like the US. And so if we have such a challenge, it means that Uganda, which only seems to be taking steps towards attaining a certain level of democracy, would struggle more than the democracies that are advanced.
The subject of electoral reforms comes in every electoral cycle.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court has made recommendations that we must have those reforms. The executive on the other side decides to take a back seat. Yeah. What does it mean for Uganda's electoral democracy?
It means that Uganda's electoral democracy keeps regressing, not progressing. Uganda's electoral democracy is supposed to progress, not regress. Because why do we conduct elections then every after 5 years? We conduct elections every after 5 years to be able to test the system. Just how good have we developed an electoral system that can outlive a period of time? There are those who talk about 40 years of elections. Ghana talks about 8 years of electoral cycles. So they've gone through 8 electoral cycles. And until the day you have an incumbent handing over power peacefully through an election to opposition, Uganda will continue to have the kinds of elections that we have, because there is no confidence in the electoral system to produce a different president. Let's first leave the members of parliament. There is confidence in the electoral process to produce a different set of LC5 chairpersons. There is confidence in the electoral system to produce a different set of LC3s. There is confidence in Uganda's electoral system to produce a different crop of MPs, but there is no confidence in the Ugandan electoral system to produce a different president. And until that question is resolved by the voters themselves, the mayhem around the processes, around the reforms, around the suspicion from the government, around the suspicion from those who wield power. Because remember, every time you are the one in power, you must fight. Democracy is a struggle. It is a struggle for the fittest. It is not an easy job. It's not that it's handed over on a silver plate. Everybody must, within the box, show how much muscle they have.
You see, when you're speaking that, someone wrote a book and said the primary goal of any government in power is to stay in power.
Yes.
Number one goal is for them to stay in power.
Yes.
But it is also important that we shape our democratic systems. I've taken time here, Charity, because that will bring back hope and trust in the electoral processes. Just like you've said, I voted under the same, conditions last year, the other time. What will take me back to the ballot? Things are staying as they are. I am sure that people will complain at the end of the electoral system. We will go back to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will make decisions. Those decisions will stay on the file. On the file. Citizens, there used to be such a thing like the Citizens Compact, where civil society went and got the views of Ugandans and put them into this compact, and they presented it and said, this is what Ugandans are saying, and can we incorporate it into the amendments, electoral amendments? I'm not hearing that. But maybe that's water under the bridge. It looks like we'll not have any electoral reforms. I remember, I think the Honorable Norbert Mao excited us a little bit. There was also a move by a private member to move a private member's bill.
Yes.
I don't know where that's basically...
It was also stayed.
It was also stayed. So let's put electoral reforms aside. From your view, they will not happen.
No, they won't happen ahead of 2026. But that doesn't mean they will never happen.
Okay, at least let's go.
The more we have them, the more they linger about. How do you know? It's the same thing with the Supreme Court ruling that just took place that sent Ugandans dancing. That had been stayed for a whole, how many years? Almost 21 years, this had been a silver question. The question of civilians being tried in the military court had been discussed for 21 years in Uganda, and no single court ruling had clarified it.
So from what you're saying, you just have hope.
Yes. That
you have hope that one day
there will be a court session that will happen, revisit what has happened from 1996, and there will be a ruling to which Ugandans will again celebrate.
Interesting. Let's talk about, the electoral processes are already here. The Electoral Commission is starting the updating of the voters' register. There's been, grumblings within the population that these days were very few. Many people may not find themselves onto the national register. What do you make of the Electoral Commission's time frame, but also the general voter register update?
Solomon, I mentioned that, you see, elections are a process for all stakeholders. So when we talk stakeholders, we talk about the media. The media has a very key role to play in elections. And I will tell you why it is important for the media to provide timely information. The media can make or break. The media actually in my estimation, overpumped Harris in the US and made her believe everything was perfect. They duped her to the extent she didn't see what Trump and his team were doing. That's how powerful the media can be. The media can make you believe even the unbelievable. So the media should have been at every one single update center to update the country on what the Electoral Commission is doing within the sub-counties. The Electoral Commission said the voter update process is going to happen within the 10,000 sub-counties, over 10,000 sub-counties of Uganda. But what has happened is that some of the update has taken place in villages. We have 70,000 villages. So they went beyond the sub-county to the villages. Now that is a change from the script because you see, when you agree that the process is going to be sub-county, it better stick to sub-county because the number of population that is considered for the sub-county is different for the population that is considered for the village. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some villages for which the people said the process took 3-4 days to start. The Electoral Commission has not came out, addressed some of the issues. The chairman of the Electoral Commission said the process is going on too well. Who is holding the Electoral Commission accountable? No one seems to be holding them accountable. Not even the citizens. They don't know what to say, where to report, what to say, what they're finding. They're being told some places, hold on 2 days, 3 days, we start. And yet the process was already announced. So who holds the Electoral Commission accountable for the process that they are running? They are holding themselves accountable through civil society organizations that they themselves are happy to work with, not independent civil society organizations. And every time accountability is compromised, then the process will most likely not be as clean as it is. Remember, elections are supposed to be transparent. Elections are supposed to be inclusive. Elections are supposed to be accountable processes. As long as there is tinkering on any of the principles for a good election, for accountability, for transparency, for inclusiveness, then the process is already tainted. The process cannot be trusted. So my question to the Electoral Commission, which I expect the chairperson to respond to now that you ask it, who is holding the Electoral Commission accountable for even the national voter process? Are there independent civil society organizations that are supporting this process? And if they are, have they produced systematic reports that show us what is happening in each of the sub-counties and what exactly happened with the voters? The voters have started to change some of their data. There are those who are checking to see if they're on the register. The process has been slow. It hasn't been hyped. Usually the people who hype these processes would be the media. It would be civil society. Civil society has a central role it plays in civic organizing and in electoral processes. Every time it is relegated to the periphery, you get what you get now, silence. You get what you get now, quiet. You get what you get now, less accountability. No eyes on the ball. Less eyes on the ball. They are there, there are eyes on the ball, but they are less. The more the eyes on the ball for an electoral process, the better the process. The less the eyes on an electoral process, the worse the process, no matter what it produces.
And you know, the electoral processes start there, updating of the voters' register. And some people actually argue that the vote is stolen at that point.
Absolutely.
The registration of the voters. I know, for example, of some constituencies that bring in people from across the border, they register, and when it's time for voting, they come and vote and then go back.
Yes.
So it's very important for us as a country to pay attention to the voter register.
Yes.
And updating it. That's where
Yes.
the ghosts come in. That's
Yes.
where everything starts and stops there.
Yes.
How important is it for Ugandans to keep a keen eye on that?
So, like I have just said, and what you say, I agree with 100%, except we keep a close eye, except we account ourselves. Can Ugandans across the country, the 10,000 sub-counties, tell us what has been their experience in this voter update process. What have they seen? Did they go there? There's some of them who have said, I am tired. I will not be part of the process. It was announced when I am away from here. I don't know if I'll find the process going. That is a different ballgame. But there are those who are actually there. Can you report? We have mechanisms. We have social media. We have TikTok. We have Facebook. Facebook through VPN. Yes, it may be closed, but we have Facebook through VPN. Can you say something?
I feel like there's a lot of silence.
There is silence from the citizens themselves. There is silence from the civil society themselves. There is silence everywhere. Everybody has given up on the process, and it's like, let it go on for those who want to go through it. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of laying back. There's a lot of what we call voter apathy. Voter apathy is a disease. And everybody who has voted for more than 6 years will suffer from voter apathy. But the cure for the disease called voter apathy is what we call voter mobilization, which is lacking in the process. That kukuma, the energy, tell the voter, your vote counts, your vote matters.
Voter education.
That voter education, the civic education, you know, the energy, it's needed.
Yeah.
You need to be reminded that my vote, actually my vote
counts.
It
Go and
counts.
vote.
So when I vote,
I don't feel that.
Many
voters
voters don't feel anything like that.
Previously people would say, it starts here, go and check your register.
Exactly.
You have the celebrities, you have the musicians, you have the politicians,
You have the
everyone.
cultural leaders.
So I'm sort of telling people, go and vote the religious leaders. Go and get your name on that register, because if you're not there,
you can't vote.
You will not vote.
Yes.
I don't feel that.
There are a few radio stations that
I honestly don't feel that. I don't know, maybe it's my end, but...
No, it's all over. And I think your feeling represents a lot of Ugandans. It's just that we haven't quantified them. Right now, civil society needs to quickly move into quantifying. Say how many Ugandans are feeling the vibe for elections. That is already a good study to be running on Ipsos. It's a good study to be running on AIIJ. That out of the 18 million voters or 24 million voters, only 5 million feel the vibe. Only 6 billion feel the vibe. That will tell you something about the process. It doesn't matter. It will just ask voters, just go out as the media, do a massive survey. Just ask people, just walk to those centers, ask people, how do you feel about the election? How do you feel? And let them tell you, I feel good about the election. I feel I'm enthused. I'm going to participate. I'm going to vote. I don't care. Whatever will take place, let's tally the number. Once you see that number dupe to 5 to 4 million against 10 million who are saying we don't care, then you know there is a problem with the process. And I already know there is a problem with the process. One of the biggest problems with the process is the silence. The second problem with the process is the lack of information from Electoral Commission to the ordinary citizen, and information flowing from the ordinary citizen back to the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission said, look, we have a dashboard. We've put out a URL for people to check their data online, to update your process online. But see, if you do those URL things for people in Kampala, we did a survey in 2021 and we said there are only 5 million Ugandans who have smartphones. And of that 5 million Ugandans who have smartphones, and I'm talking of a survey of 2021, Afrobarometer has not come out to tell us how many right now in 2025 have smartphones. But of those ones, Solomon would have 2 smartphones. So Solomon, even when we're counting 5 million, those 5 million phones were in less hands because some people had 2 smartphones, some people had 3 smartphones. What that meant is that if you have a URL, therefore, it was closing out a certain bracket of people. Have they hit TikTok? Have they hit X Spaces with this information from the Electoral Commission? No. Conversations are happening, small conversations, women-facet conversations. We've had conversations around women and elections. They are going on, but they are not out there for a broad campaign for all the 24 million voters. And that is what is lacking. We need 24 million voters understanding. Why should I vote? What does it What does it amount to if I don't vote?
Why do I care?
Why do I care about the vote? Why should I show up? So what if I don't vote? Why is there democracy? Why do you talk about these things? Why do you talk about elections? Why do you spend your time? Why do you tell us about elections? I can do without elections and still go on in my little shop. I don't need your election.
And that's dangerous.
Very bad. Because Solomon, what that means is that we'll continue to have the potholes that we have. We'll continue to have the lack of accountability, which I talked about earlier on. Parliament swindling money how they want, and the voter cannot hold them accountable. In the US, you just saw accountability happening. Accountability happening with the voter saying, I don't see the money in my pocket, so I'm not going to vote you, the Democrats. You've been in the chair, and I didn't see the money in my pocket, so let me try a Republican. Even if I don't expect so much from him, let me give him a chance. We saw that happening. Yeah. And through our vote, we should be able to see that that's not going to happen. In Kenya, it happened. In Ghana, it happened. And I will tell you why in Kenya and Ghana it happened. For the last 8 electoral cycles in Ghana, civil society has not stopped producing systematic reports about the process, not even for one single day. They produce reports that the Electoral Commission considers. They produce reports that the Civic and Voter Education National Center considers. Our Uganda Human Rights Commission is mandated to carry out civic and voter education. They have no budget. They have no money whatsoever to do that. So even them, they are stuck in this funding paralysis. And government has not put aside a budget for them to go ahead and do the civic and voter education, because you see, they're not directly a government arm. They're supposed to be an independent arm, because human rights, in terms of legalese, are a process to be tracked. Yeah. And they are mainly violated during electoral processes.
You know, Charity, you've mentioned civil society about 10 times since we started this interview.
I had to.
What is the place of civil society in this election? And can we still locate it with the challenges that exist right now? Yeah, let's start there. I mean, for example, let's face it, this, CEDU, Citizens Coalition for Electoral Democracy, painfully, that organization that used to mobilize many civil society organizations and did a big campaign is no more. It is no more. It's painful to even to talk about this. It's painful. And you used to be at the top leadership of that. CEDU is not here anymore. What is going to be the place of civil society in this election?
Civil society, like I started by saying, has been relegated to the periphery. And that is sad for any electoral process. Because what does civil society do? So why do I spend time saying civil society? And why do you ask therefore a question about civil society? Civil society would help with peace building. It would help with monitoring for violence. It would help with monitoring for hate speech. It would help with mobilizing the citizens, the energy that I talked about. The energy around the elections, around good candidates. It would help with reviewing manifestos. Remember, these candidates are going to bring manifestos. Civil societies would dissect for you that manifesto and make you understand, is this useful to an ordinary citizen? Is this not useful? How do we correlate? What is the conundrum? What is the connection for you, the ordinary citizen? Now, that is the role of civil society. Civil society is that one kingpin in an electoral process in helping the ordinary voter vis-a-vis the electoral body.
Will they do their work this time around?
I don't see civil society play their role in the 2026 election. 2 dangerous dynamics. Number 1, the lack of funding. And the second one is the fear of the funders. The donors are afraid with what happened with them and the government in 2021. The government suspected the work that the donors were doing in Uganda. They said they were facilitating civil society organizations to pull down the government. Remember, we said democracy is a struggle for space. The government will do everything possible to stay in power. And so civil society was said to be carrying the views of the West and pulling down the government. Now, the government at one point mooted an idea of sponsoring civil society organizations, but civil society were reluctant for that move. Why? Because how do I get you, Solomon, to account if you feed me? How fair and objective can I be in giving you feedback if you give me food to eat? He who calls the piper, he who plays the tune. Okay, so it means if we are being fed by government, government runs our budgets and therefore runs our agenda, it would be very difficult to hold government accountable for any of the things they did. And even if we held them accountable, the possibility of doing what they have done with the electoral reforms that were suggested by the courts of law would be very high. So government would hear everything you're saying and they would say, after all, what can you do? You're in our pocket. You shout for all you care, or you do what you want to do, but you cannot push us. You can't put any pressure. But see, democracy, like I told you, has tenets, and its tenets are clear. One of the tenets for a good democratic dispensation is the respect for human rights, is credible electoral processes, is the rule of law. All those are tenets for a good democracy. If the rule of law is working, there must be good democratic processes. There must be respect for human rights. Now, all those are facets that are supposed to play out with each other, and there must be accountability.
Yes, civil society. I mean, no one ever believed that DGF would be closed. It was one of the biggest funders of many organizations in the democracy space. You've heard of what's happening, you know.
You say it now.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, it's really very bad for civil society organizations in the democracy space. Also, the Electoral Commission had to approve civil society organizations they're going to be working with. It'll be interesting to see how that will play out in the coming days. But let's shift gears and talk about the last election was one of the most violent elections of our time. We witnessed, you know, brutality at its highest. Charity, what are we going to do to have a peaceful election in 2026?
So, and I'm happy that we're back to peace. I'll start with a funny article that was written by my friend Charles Onyango-Obo. Charles Onyango-Obo wrote a piece not too long ago where he said, look, South Sudan has failed to conduct an election for almost 12 or so years. And each time, the issue that is given by the South Sudanese government is that we are not ready. And the government continually stops being respected across the board. The African Union believes in democracy. It believes in elections. It believes in good governance. The UN, the whole system as it is built, believes in democracy, believes in elections, and believes in good governance. Now, the world is a globe. And each of these countries relate to each other based on the values of democracy, good governance. So the whole question of peace architecture is the heart of the UN. And by the time democracy, elections were crafted in 1884 and the years gone yonder, the idea was, how do we have peace in the world without just carrying guns and fighting each other, because we must change leadership. And so the question of peace around elections themselves are supposed to be a tool of peaceful transfer of power from one set of people to the next set of people. And that is why for members of parliament, you kick them out and you get a new set of members of parliament coming in. Even in other democracies, it has happened. Uhuru was kicked out by Ruto in an election in Kenya. For Ghana, we have seen that happen in more than 4 or 5 elections where the opposition comes to take government and government goes to the side, and sometimes the person who was in government now becomes opposition and comes back to take power. That was the whole synopsis around elections, and that is the whole synopsis around peace. So what do we talk about when we think about peace and elections? Elections themselves are supposed to be a tool that propagates peace. So until we understand that for peace to grow, there must be credible electoral processes. That is why people believe in credible electoral processes. This is what happens. The engine of peace is an infrastructure. That infrastructure has elements. Election observation, which has been now relegated to the periphery. It is part
because it was a core.
It is part of the engine for peace. Because when you observe the electoral process, you can tell where the problem is and how to improve that process. Now, when you don't observe the electoral process, you cannot tell where the problem was, and therefore you will have violence. And that is what you saw in 2021. There was a lot of violence in 2021 because some parts of the process could not be observed. So there were places where journalists went and there were bullets flying all over their heads. The people who are moving with Amuriat will tell you that. They tell you, man, there's a point when we didn't know we would return. The people who are moving on the trail of Robert Chagulanyi Sentamu will tell you there are times when they didn't know they would be alive. The observers themselves could only pick bits and synopses from what the journalists who dared do what they did. The journalists were accused of being biased because they were on campaign trails of the opposition, which should not ideally happen in a democracy, in a good electoral dispensation. That is why we talk about the electoral environment. That is the second peace architecture. So remember, if it is an architecture for peace, it sits on a number of dices. One, election observation. Secondly, you must have a good electoral environment. A good electoral environment is one that espouses tolerance, is one that espouses divergent views, a hybrid of views. They must exist in the marketplace and they must play out. These ideas, these belief systems must equally play out, not some dominating others and failing others. The role of security should be minimized in a good electoral environment. Now, if the role of security is pronounced in an electoral process, the peace architecture is already at an age. So how do you promote peace? Have less of securitization, have more election observation, have more journalists onto the trails, have them do their work naturally, the way journalists is supposed to be balanced, fair, have all facets of the people participating, look out for disinformation, monitor it on a continuous basis, disinformation, misinformation, fake news, all those are key things to look out for in an electoral process. Train the journalists on what a good political story is, what a good manifesto is. Look at the manifestos, analyze them, get civil society to produce systematic reports that are produced consecutively throughout the cycle. I'll tell you, Solomon, that throughout, we are now left with 12 months, and civil society does not have one key mantle it has produced concerning the 2026 election, even as the voter update goes on. The first mantle should have been the reorganization of polling stations. Electoral Commission has never produced that data. Even when the chairperson said, yes, the polling stations were reorganized last year in September, we collected the data, we reorganized the polling stations. Here is the data. It's not there. Civil society has not analyzed any of that data, has not produced any report on how the polling stations were reorganized, where they are, how many exist. That already shows you there is darkness at noon. The election process is not as transparent as it is supposed to be.
Wow. Because from what you're saying, again, it goes back to what you're saying, who is actually holding the Electoral Commission accountable for all the electoral processes, and are they done in a transparent manner? Speaking about transparency, one of the things that really caused mayhem in the last election, and I hope it doesn't have to come back, was the shutting down of the internet.
And it's going to happen.
And ensuring that people can see the transparency of the electoral system properly and question, the dashboard and the Electoral Commission setup. Do you see that coming back again?
I see that coming back again. If up to now we do not have reports that have been producing hate speech. You see, we are supposed to have civil society producing reports that are tracking hate speech. Where is the hate speech? Who is saying it? How is it said?
The state woke up and shut down the internet, Charity.
How is it manifesting itself? Who is doing it? The state claimed they shut down the internet because of hate speech. And so if it is true, which I do not want to believe, because the UN has since declared that the internet is a human right. Yes, it is. So it is your right to be on that internet, and no one should take away that right. Remember, rights are inherent. They are God-given. They are not given by the state. The state simply protects, enables, respects, and upholds those rights. So if the internet is a human right, what the state is being told to do is not to shut it down. Respect its usage, uphold its usage, promote its usage. Do not dare shut it down. That's what it means.
But you
so until you understand what it means for the UN to recognize it as a human right, you can think it's just an ordinary
You just
thing.
said it's going to happen again. Why?
Yes, I said it will happen again because I saw South Sudan the other day switching off the internet. They've been inspired by Uganda. It has happened in Uganda many times. You're not on Facebook. Who has done anything to this country? Nothing. So, if there's going to be hate speech and they think maybe it has gone out of hand and they think it's a security issue, if they think you're following too much of the results on the internet and you're seeing too many things from polling stations and you're causing a lot of fear, anger, and pangas everywhere, they will switch off. And I see it happening. Take my word. You will again be off and you have to look for VPN.
But that also doesn't mean well for
democracy.
Yeah, electoral democracy.
Even elections. It doesn't. It doesn't. And I just explained, I first started by explaining what it would be in a good democratic dispensation. I mean, because they produced fake videos of people who were voting for Trump, he didn't shut down the internet. Remember, there were videos that came out where they said the state is failing people to vote for Trump, and that even if you pressed and you wanted to vote for Trump, your vote could not be registered. There were fakes that were being produced, but the internet was not shut down. What happened is the state went to verify. Is it true? Not true? They produced the correct information, and voila, the votes were being held.
The reason why I brought this up, because the digital spaces are now, places where we go and freely express ourselves the way we feel. We use them to do mobilization, activism, use them to do voter education and sensitization. So when you touch that space again, you continue to shrink that civic space where people can freely express themselves. So I hope that I hope that what you're saying doesn't happen, but I'm just hoping. I hope it doesn't.
It will happen.
Our time is fast spent. Before we leave this conversation, I wanted to talk about the place of women in this election, participation of women in this election. I mean, we're all talking about bringing on women on board, women inclusiveness in shaping our democracy, growing other charities like you who are able to speak up and follow the electoral processes, amplifying women voices in this election. How can we promote women participation in this election this time around?
The first time Miria Obote said she was standing to be president, the men shot her down, Solomon. They were quick to say things. How do you even think you will be president of this country walking around in a Gomesi? Where she stood her ground. She went ahead and stood to be elected. She was the first one to break the ice for the women. Then followed Betty Olive Kamya. Betty Olive Kamya went around the trail, and I hoped that there would be a statistical increment in the number of women who had voted Miria to Betty Olive Kamya, but that didn't happen. And then we had Sharia coming on board. And now we do not seem to have one single woman saying she's going to stand for presidency. Look, it doesn't matter even if they don't win the presidency. But the fact that they try to stand in an election and that they produce a manifesto, they produce an agenda, they talk about issues that affect their country, there is a certain respect that comes for women that even those in the governance space begin to recognize. So what has happened with 2026 is that UONET has led the women to produce the Women Manifesto. This is done every time there's going to be an election. So the Women Manifesto is out, and it's going to be launched. If it wasn't launched, it's yet to be launched. The manifesto talks about the key things that women want to see in this election. One of them, which I think will not be achieved, was the question of finances, that women find it difficult to pay the financial threshold to participate in electoral positions, to be a member of parliament. Women members of parliament contest across the whole district, and yet for the constituent members of parliament, they just go in a small constituency. So the demand is higher for the woman, even if she has a constituency to stand for. And then there was the question of parity. As much as there seemed to be an increase in the number of women because of the increase in the number of districts, the question of parity as to whether it's useful to the ordinary woman in the countryside was not being felt. Actually, the women vote more for the men in the election, and they pay less attention to the women in the election. But it is a good inspiration to young girls, to your daughter, to my daughter, to think there is a woman that also stood to be a president. I hope there'll be a woman that can stand in the Senate.
I hope so. I thought you would be the one.
To stand in an election, Solomon, you need financial support. You need the financial muscle. You see the things that I'm talking about in the manifesto. You need support from your spouse. My husband doesn't want me anywhere near any electoral process. I wish I could even be a member of parliament. He doesn't want. He says you have little children, they still need the influence of their mother. Now, if you have patriarchy still reigning in my house, me, a believer in democracy, how about other women? How about other women who have never even come close to presenting democratic views?
But you see, when women like you who have gone to school, you who have, studied, you are lovers of democracy, decide to take a back seat and do nothing about it, it leaves you in a very delicate place.
I know.
As women in this country.
Yes.
So many women share your views.
In terms of democracy, yes, I know they do.
So then if Charity doesn't stand, who will?
Yes, I know, Solomon, that's the dilemma. The dilemma, I think, that we continue to suffer in African nations, but I am happy that Nigeria has soared above this. We now have a Chief Justice for Nigeria who is a woman. It hasn't happened in Uganda yet. Tell me which Chief Justice was a woman, if you recall.
Yeah, but if you, Charity, who understands democracy, doesn't want to stand even for a member of
parliament.
And
I am saying it's because the forces of patriarchy still exist. So must all homes go splitting, or must all peace-loving society go in mayhem simply because you love democracy? I think there must be a strike of a balance. There is need to sensitize men. So my husband lacks sensitization. Many husbands lack sensitization. They need to be sensitized on, yes, your woman can stand. Yes, your woman can be in parliament. Yes, your woman can take up leadership position. And you support them. And you support them to achieve. And you support them. Nobody will steal them from you. Men have this thing When she goes there, she's going to become a wild woman, a wild animal. When she studies the law, she's become wild. They've had all these sentiments.
Come back and be the man in the house.
Yes, she will not respect me. She will not do anything for me. I think that this journey can only be won by sensitization, even for the men. I have seen it happening deliberately in Zimbabwe, and I have seen it happening in Botswana. And there's a lot of change on the thrust of men supporting women to take up leadership positions. Actually, husbands taking lead role in campaigning for their wives, being there for them, and supporting them through the leadership role. We need to benchmark Botswana. We need to benchmark Zimbabwe to pick key lessons on how do we support women to do this better.
Yeah. Last one from me is, look, Charity, there's so many people who want to come and stand for member of parliament or even other electoral vacancies. 3 things come to mind. The first one, you hinted about it. Money. You need money to win this election. Yes. When do we go past that politics to advance into issue-based politics, where I will come and stand before masses, right? And I present my manifesto. And you will hear it, and we'll anchor our politics on climate change, on foreign policy, on economic reforms, on electoral reforms. I go before the electorate and I speak all the beautiful, nice policies and work plans and what I want to do and how I'm going to be monitored and, accountability systems, and put it before the voters. And the voters choose the very person with the best policy.
So Solomon, that's a good dream.
How do we grow our democracy into an issue-based democracy?
That would have started with the political parties. So we needed to have had strong political parties that are given room to mobilize funds, to grow good leaders, and to support issues, and identify who will go to represent their issues. But our political parties, as you know them, have become vehicles for survival for the fittest. How do I benefit from this vehicle? Where do I belong? How do I eat? Backstabbing, hatred, anger. That is what the political parties are about. And then the state has not facilitated a good environment for the growth of those political parties. When Ant came, there was all this hope. Alaso was a deputy to a very good deputy to Mugisha Muntu. There's a lot of hope. Then there's Ambassador Edith Sempala. And so the whole outfit was a beautiful outfit. When they stood at the Serena with all these lawyers that had been lined up, the team and the launch and the colors and everything going up, it looked like Ant was the thing that was going to change the spectrum. That suddenly we were moving past money to think about issues and mobilize funds to support people who have good issues.
And they have built their doctrine on that.
Exactly, but it has not come to pass. Why? Very few people believed in the dream. Secondly, there's been less funding that has happened to them as Ant. They've tried to use online spaces, digital spaces, to have conversations and to get people to understand where they're coming from, how they're organizing. That has not picked up. So until we have strong political parties, like you see how the Minister for Gender is running from her constituency because the people of UPC are saying, we are not voting you back. You became NRM more than UPC. She's now moved away to find a Cheng in her constituency because it is more accepting for yellow girls. Until we have political parties that can live in a village called Akokoro and remain there for centuries, believing in their UPC and their red color. Until we get to that level of strong political parties, not simply turning the whole of Eastern yellow, using resources and belief systems, not necessarily issues, we're going to have an election of money upon money upon money upon money, and backstabbing, selfishness, hatred. And maybe that is why it is not attractive for men to even send their women to a pond of thieves.
So you call it?
Oh, yes.
Charity Ahimbisibwe, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, Solomon. Happy to be on. The hard questions are really hard.
Well, it has been a candid conversation on our electoral democracy. And I hope that, conversations like these start to heat up so that we all participate in shaping our democracy. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I'm Solomon Serwanjja, and this is The Hard Questions.